back to Liberty Nation's Swamponomics videocast. I'm Andrew Moran, Liberty Nation's economics correspondent. In part 2 of our interview with author Carol Roth, we look at the latest inflation data and understand, or try to understand, how the White House and the Federal Reserve got it so wrong. As everyone knows, anyone in economics or business knows, the March annual inflation rate surged at 8.5%. 8.5%. As you said, is probably a lot higher than that, considering the weighted indexes and changing the calculations. The Federal Reserve and the White House insisted for more than a year that inflation was transitory. Here at Liberty Nation, we've warned about rampant inflation since the first CARES Act was passed. Now, a quick look at your Twitter feed shows that you've been raising inflation alarm bells for a long time as well. So what did you see differently that the administration or the central bank, the smartest people apparently in the world, did not see?
So even though I feel like I'm pretty smart about things, this particular situation was not because I am some sort of a genius. It was just incredibly obvious. You cannot shut down large swaths of an economy, restrict supply, throw dollars on top of that, so increase demand of dollars into restricted supply, and have the Fed print trillions of dollars. So Fed printing, government stimulus, dislocation of labor market, dislocation of supply chain on down, and not have this outcome. I don't know fundamentally what they were thinking. My personal belief, and it's just my opinion, is that they knew exactly what they were doing, because there's just no way people with that level of education would not be able to figure it out when people who were just going through their daily lives went, yeah, this obviously doesn't make any sense. And I think there was a lot of arrogance. The people who are proponents of MMT, modern monetary theory, or I call it magic money tree, certainly are not receiving the level of public ridicule that they should be. They should be dragged through the streets, figuratively speaking, and basically said, you were the proponents of this. You said that we could just, spend as much as we want, and there is no outcome, and we are living that very obvious outcome today. So it was appalling to me, and I wrote many an op-ed and many a tweet all along about the fact that they said there was going to be no inflation, going to run a little hot, it's going to be transitory. Then when it was clear that it wasn't transitory, it was your fault as a consumer. Then it was greedy businesses' fault. Now it's Putin's fault. I mean, it has been everybody's fault except for the people who enacted this policy. We have no accountability. This is total moral hazard. And if we don't stand up and demand accountability, the next time around it's going to be even worse.
You missed one. Brian Deese, he said last summer that if you don't count things causing inflation, there wouldn't be any inflation.
Oh, good. Yeah, that makes sense.
So minutes from the latest Federal Open Market Committee meeting show that the Fed is likely to be more aggressive on raising interest rates. Lael Brainerd, she recently said that they want to be a bit more aggressive. James Bullard's been laughing at all of his colleagues, saying, you have to be a lot more aggressive than what you're doing right now. So you also wrote about this on the pages of The Blaze. Do you think that the Federal Reserve is behind the curve on inflation, or is it too late to combat inflation with what they're currently doing?
I mean, they're so far behind the curve on inflation that as of a month ago, when we'd been reaching record highs, since the 1980s, 4-decade highs in inflation, they were still purchasing securities. They still had accommodative policy up until last month. So that reads very behind the curve. I was somebody who did not want to see any level of intervention. But even if you said, well, they needed to stabilize the market and liquidity, all the things that you normally hear about in March, by June of 2020, we had seen all-time highs in the stock market. So at that point in time, it would have been appropriate to take away that level of accommodation and then start on a path back to normalization. Certainly, they didn't do any of that. They went in the opposite direction. They kept incredibly accommodative policy, and they enabled a historic transfer of wealth from Main Street to Wall Street. So to think that these people who quote unquote didn't see inflation coming and then told us it was going to be transitory, who literally, I mean, the Chair Powell came out in a conference at one point in time and said that he didn't anticipate the disruptions to the labor market and supply chain. Like, how would you not have anticipated that when you stopped like a third of the economy? So to have those people, the smartest people in the room, think that they could dictate policy and come out with this outcome, why would we think that they could, even if they had the tools to combat inflation, be able to do it? And then the reality is that the monetary policy tools that they do have, I think it's going to be almost impossible for them to do that without causing a recession, or at least some really bad stagflation, where the economy stagnates, but we still have this elevated level of inflation for some time, because you can change the demand patterns, right? You can stop people from wanting to buy a house, or you can stop people from making purchases. But we have all of these structural supply imbalances. We talked about the labor market. You have it in the housing market. We are underbuilt by 4 to 5 million homes. We have it in energy, other commodities, healthcare infrastructure. These are all supply side issues, and I have no idea how monetary policy is supposed to fix it pretty much at all, but let alone without throwing the entire economy into disarray. So this idea of a quote unquote soft landing, that they're just going to be able to thread the needle perfectly when they have been wrong every moment before, is not something that if I were a betting woman, that I would be putting all of my chips on.
So before I get to my last question, I just want to point out something, is that James Bullard, he recently said in a post on the St. Louis Fed Bank website, he said that monetary policy is still extremely accommodative, because when you factor inflation and interest rates, and the real interest rate is still sub-zero.
Negative, exactly.
And they're still printing money, and they only recently just stopped purchasing assets. So even he admits that this is still all accommodative, still easy money flowing to the economy. All right, so my last question here is about Bidenomics and killing the economy. You recently wrote about the 4 bold moves the president could do to fix the economy. So for those that did not read your splendid piece on the Blaze, or if you grace voters with your presence as running for president, what would these measures be?
So, this is sort of a dream list of things that the president could be doing. And I'll just caveat it by saying, I'm not delusional. He probably won't do any of these things, but just to kind of throw it out there, because obviously we should all be rooting for a great economy, regardless of who is in the White House. So the first thing would be to return us to energy independence. And I'm not talking about diverting, feed and making ethanol and ruining people's engines. I'm talking about, real policy, reinstating some of these canceled oil and gas leases, reinstating Keystone Pipeline. Most importantly, getting away from their ESG policy. They are trying to make it easier for these sources of capital to basically, for moral reasons or for central planning reasons, not invest capital in these areas which are desperately needed. So, that would be the first thing, is to do a complete 180 on those policies. I'm sure that won't happen. The second, and again, don't laugh at me here, would be to shrink government spending, and frankly, to transition a whole lot of jobs out. This would be phenomenal. I mean, not only would we shrink the size of the government and shrink the bill that we have to pay, but as I mentioned, we have this huge supply-demand imbalance in the labor market. So at a time when jobs are plentiful, it would be a great time to transition government workers back into the private sector. It would be a win-win for everybody. Again, I don't think that that's going to happen. They could make it easier for small businesses to hire. They could be more accommodative of flexible working, gig working, get rid of some of the onerous rules that go along with hiring your first employee and some of the additional costs that go along with that. Again, the Biden administration is on the exact opposite side. They are proponents of the PRO Act. They're trying to kill the gig economy. They're trying to monitor bank accounts and have people file if you're a hobby business because you made $600 on Etsy, so they can come after you. So they're certainly not on the let's be more laissez-faire side of the equation, but they could do that. And then, as we've been alluding to, they could rein in the Fed. I mean, the Federal Reserve is just such an epic disaster. And I'm not one of the end the Fed people. And I'll tell you why. And the reason is because if you leave those powers up for grabs, the government is going to take them over. And the only group of people who would be worse than the Fed in terms of managing monetary policy would be the people in Congress. So what they need to do is they need to strip back that mandate. No more money printing. We should have the supply of money, kind of like Milton Friedman, I think, suggested many years ago, tied to changes in GDP or some formula like that, and really narrow in their purpose, and no more of the we're going to spend trillions of dollars that don't exist and influence interest rates artificially and throw savers and retirees under the bus so that our friends on Wall Street can get inflated asset prices. I mean, it's absurd. The idea that this is that they're working for the people broadly is insane. And again, they are a government agency, like they're quasi like government private partnership agency thing. It's clearly not working out. It's time to rein that in.
Just before we leave, I'd like to point out that even Milton Friedman wanted to end the Fed a couple of years before he died. So you're quoting Milton Friedman there, but he also wanted to, abolish the Federal Reserve System, which would be a great thing. So I'd like to thank Miss Carol Roth for appearing on a special edition of Liberty Nation Swamponomics TV. Thank you very much for gracing us with your presence, Ms. Roth.
Thank you very much. If anybody wants to connect with me, I am on Twitter at Carol JS Roth. And fair warning, you need to have a very warped sense of humor.
And you'll be quite entertained, if I may say so myself. Thank you again. So, has inflation peaked? Will Bidenomics save the day? Are Americans better off now than they were 4 years ago? Despite claims that this is Putin's price hike, the US economy had been drowning in a pool of inflation thanks to a combination of fiscal and monetary expansion. Russia's invasion of Ukraine may have exacerbated today's price pressures, but it was the swamp's economics, or Swamponomics if you will, that led to this economy that the United States has never witnessed before. Perhaps Fed Chair Jerome Powell uttered these words before turning on the printing press and injecting the system with trillions of dollars. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. That's it from this week. Please read my full Swamponomics column each week on LibertyNation.com and check out my previous interviews like this one on Liberty Nation's YouTube channel. Thank you.
We're doing it for real, really real. Liberty Nation.
And Jeff Charles, contributor for LibertyNation.com.
I think we're starting to make an impact. Liberty style, fighting for freedom.
Daily tracking poll sponsored by Liberty Nation for Thursday.
Mentioned by Dan Bongino, Rasmussen, Jordan Peterson, and
I
others.
can do it again if you want me to.
Cited in Mark Levin's American Marxism.
I think we're starting to make a really big impact. Get noticed. We're doing it. Rock on. I'm gone.